Hello and welcome to another live here on the channel. Today we are talking about President Joe Biden's pardon on his son, Hunter Biden. All the details about that. We're going to be breaking it down, giving you all of the links and news and where to find the information here. As always, as much as I can, have all of the links that I use, any additional resources that I may not mention or directly use in the video, but I thought might be helpful to you in the description of this video. So you can go and look at those right now. They're here already. So you can go take a look live with us as we are, looking at documents, posts, commentary, videos, etc. in this live show. So we'll be talking about President Joe Biden's pardon on his son Hunter, all the details around that, as well as really focusing on Keith, what am I saying? Pete Hegseth. I promised that. Oh goodness, I promised that a couple weeks ago. So I'm excited that you're getting to join in on this live show that is well overdue. So first, let's talk about. Let me find my document to share. All right. All right. Here we go. December 1st, 2024 is when Biden announced and officially pardoned his son, Hunter. Now, there's a lot of context to that pardon, per usual, but we're going to dive into some of that detail here in this video, especially as there's a lot to dive into when it comes to a biblical context of how to look at what's going on. So first and foremost, this is a blanket pardon. If you don't know what a pardon is, the president has the ability to pardon anyone that they see fit as president while they are actually in office as president of the United States. And these pardons have varied from president to president on who it is, what it's for, etc. But this is one of, I won't say it is the most because I haven't done the research to know that for sure, but this certainly is one of the most broad, kind of generalized, blanketed pardons we've ever seen. And of course, if you've been following any of the issues, problems, really the federal felonies that he's been convicted of, the controversies around his laptop having, private back and forth with the Russian government. There's been a lot of court cases around all of this. And we're going to dive into some of that as well, the stuff that's factual, not the stuff that's conspiratorial. But this is it's up there when it comes to the most blanketed, generalized pardon ever. Now, a pardon basically means that they are now not responsible or not, they can't be convicted for any crimes, basically, in that context of what they're pardoned for. That's generally how it's used. If a family member or, someone popular, a popular celebrity or whatever, somebody loved by the country has some issue on their record or they're about to be convicted for something, the president may choose to pardon them. He can also pardon family. In this case, he pardoned his son, Hunter. Now, we're going to dive into the statement that he made. By the way, there is this link right here, this download link right here. This shows you the public disclosure of the legal information. Okay. And then let's dive in. I want to show my face while I do this. We also have the statement that he made on December 1st. And I want to read that to you. You may have heard bits and pieces of it, but I want to read the full thing because it reveals a lot. So Biden says, "Today I signed a pardon for my son, Hunter. From the day I took office, I said I would not interfere with the Justice Department's decision making. And I kept my word even as I have watched my son be selectively and unfairly prosecuted. Without aggravating factors like use in a crime, multiple purchases, or buying a weapon as a straw purchaser, people are almost never brought to trial on felony charges solely for how they filled out a gun form. Those who were late paying their taxes because of serious addictions, but paid them back subsequently with interest and penalties are typically given non-criminal resolutions. It's clear that Hunter was treated differently. The charges in this case came about only after several of my political opponents in Congress instigated them to attack me and oppose my election. Then a carefully negotiated plea deal agreed to by the Department of Justice unraveled in the courtroom, with a number of my political opponents in Congress taking credit for bringing political pressure on the process. He had the plea deal held, it would have been a fair, reasonable Had he had the plea deal held, it would have been a fair, reasonable resolution of Hunter's case. No reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's case can reach any other conclusion but that Hunter was singled out only because he was my son, and that is wrong. There has been an effort to break Hunter, who has been 5.5 years sober, even in the face of unrelenting attacks and selective prosecution. In trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, and there's no reason to believe it will stop here. Enough is enough. For my entire career, this is the one that has been like resurfaced a lot more than other things, which is this last paragraph. For my entire career, I have followed a simple principle: just tell the American people the truth. They'll be fair-minded. Here's the truth. I believe in the justice system, but as I have wrestled with this, I also believe raw politics has infected this process, and it led to a miscarriage of justice. And once I made this decision this weekend, there was no sense in delaying it further. I hope Americans will understand why a father and a president would come to this decision." So, he obviously is sharing his. Do I think that Biden wrote this? No. But obviously he chose to pardon his son, so somebody had to write something that made sense. I don't know who wrote it for him, but somebody, of course, legal, understanding the diplomaticness and the manipulation of what needs to be said and why and how, wrote this. But basically, he goes through, hey, this is what I said I was going to do. I made this decision this weekend because he was unfairly prosecuted. Now, I've followed Hunter's court cases and his federal felonies casually while they were happening, but I did quite a bit of research leading up to this live show. And, the reality is, if the cases against him are the ones stated in the 3 federal felonies that he was convicted of, which involved how he filled out his paperwork, which essentially was, you have to fill out this particular part that basically acknowledges that you're not mishandling or illegally using drugs or alcohol while buying and or having a license for a gun. And he said that he wasn't, and he was. So he, basically filled out the paperwork, not just in error, but in blatant lying about it. What's interesting is none of the things that he was convicted about had anything to do with the laptop, and yet the laptop was the most popular thing talked about Hunter. All the conspiracies around, like, oh, this is Russian, whatever. I followed it some, but to be honest, I haven't really followed it majorly, so I don't want to comment too much on that, because at the end of the day, I may be absolutely wrong, and I don't want to give you guys misinformation here. I did look at a couple things because I followed Megyn Kelly's journalism around it and some of her assessments and the places in which she was looking for things. So I have referenced some things in the description of the channel so that you can take a look at some of the major, more reputable journalists and reporters that were in the court cases, and have some of the formal information and formal data about how the court cases went out, and what information was what digital information on the laptop was credible and what wasn't, and what was subjective. So all of those things are down in the description below, as well as I know Megan had a few actual videos during her covering it as well on the laptop, so you can go take a look at her as well. But at the end of the day, Biden is pardoning his son for, he's stating in this document that he's pardoning his son for the unfair due process during these particular cases. He's not referencing a laptop. He's not referencing, not wrestling. He may be wrestling. He's not referencing the laptop, the Russian connection. He's not talking about any of that. In fact, they would blatantly call that misinformation, period. He's talking about these particular felonies that he was already charged for. And what's interesting is that he could have absolutely pardoned Hunter Biden for the felonies that he'd been charged for. He could have, a pardon is as large or small as the president's verbiage and wording. He could have said, I'm pardoning my son for these felonies that he's been charged for all of these reasons below, right? All of the reasons that he stated. But instead, he does a blanket pardon of any illegal activity that Hunter Biden had participated in the last 10 years. And actually, ironically, by stating it the morning of December 1st, Hunter actually had a little bit less than 24 hours to do anything else illegal that he wanted to do. So basically 10 years up to the end of December 1st. Now, what's curious about this is that this seems very, very suspicious when it comes to the actual truth of what happened and how much Hunter was involved and what's truth and what's conspiracy in the sense of like what's untrue, what are assumptions that we're making, what are things that have not been factually proved. One of the interesting things about the laptop that I do want to mention in this channel, in this video, is that in the court hearings, when the prosecutors provided evidence for the laptop, the digital information on Hunter Biden's laptop, a woman was there representing the FBI, I believe. And she was basically arguing that like, yeah, this is it's confirmed this is his laptop, but some of the information on the laptop has been manipulated in some way. And that's where James Lynch comes in. He is a reporter, and I think he's also a journalist. And I am spacing on who he works for, but he writes for, I believe, a few different people. But anyway, his X/Twitter coverage of this was very helpful. And I know Megyn Kelly referenced his stuff as well. And he gave a really good summary of what was happening in the court cases and kind of the details around that, which are, again, linked down below in the comments. But I'll pull them up here too. They're a little bit too small to read, to be honest. Oh, you can see them. Okay. I'm going to bring this up again. I have a summary basically of this in the description itself, so you can go read that. Basically, the United States government submitted a reply supporting its motion. Sorry, I have like a light fixture stuck. There we go. Supporting its motion to admit a Rule 1006 summary chart and electronic evidence as self-authenticating under Rule 902.14, making support claims that the evidence, particularly data from his laptop, was altered. This is what is being talked about from the defendant. So I skipped a little section there, but the defendant has acknowledged the authenticity of the trial evidence, including the laptop and the digital information on the laptop, but continues to make unsupported claims that the evidence, particularly data from his laptop, was manipulated or altered. In other words, they're saying, hey, it was manipulated, but they're not actually giving any evidence or proof for that. So the fact that, this has been labeled a conspiracy without some legitimate looking into it. I know the Senate, the Congress has been very, very adamant. They've done a lot of pushing on this, especially the Republican Party. And what's frustrating about this stuff is, we kind of wish that, like, regardless of the result, regardless of the outcome, that there would be some transparency. You know what I mean? Like that you wouldn't have people that were just making stuff up and throwing it out there, whether they disliked Biden or they disliked Trump or they disliked anybody else, right? That we would have fair justice, that we would have fair investigating, looking for the actual truth, for the actual data, which is really what a theme is here on this space, is the critical thinking to really look and notice what is true and how do we get to that? What are the sources? What's the data? What's the information? And how can we be a culture and a society that actually values truth, that values information? And so all of that really brings us to this question around, why was this labeled conspiracy and dismissed? We're not going to get into all of that. But the reality is Biden gave a blanket 10 years. If he did anything illegal within that 10 years, he's dismissed. He's not held to account for that, essentially. And that really is very interesting because while his statement was very specific to the tax fraud and the gun kind of licensing information, how he filled that out. The reality is that 10-year blanket is it's really absolutely ridiculous if those are the only things that President Biden believes that his son has done illegally. So that is a fascinating thing. But what's more fascinating than Biden actually doing it, because if you didn't think he was going to do it, even though he said, and he sent KJP out so many times to say, I'm not going to pardon my son. I'm not going to pardon. I don't know of too many people who were surprised, except for the Democrats were very, very annoyed and very irritated because they had literally gone on a limb that this was like a huge part of Biden's character. This was a huge backing for why to respect him because he wasn't going to pardon his son. There were so many compilations out there right now of people making videos of like all the Democrat media, really all the liberal media pushing this, Biden's amazing and Biden is like, no one's above the law. And then he ended up doing it. So I think more than anything, the liberals and the Democrats who are backing him are really more shocked and frustrated and conflicted about it because they got basically, they got made fun of, essentially. But what's really fascinating and what's been more fascinating to me is watching all of the commentary that's happening around the what would I do? Dismissing and or holding Biden to his decision, saying, hey, that wasn't ethical, it wasn't moral. You said this, you did this, you lied to us, right? There's those people. And then there's kind of like the self-reflection happening where people are saying, wait a minute, what would I do in that situation? And I don't know if I have heard anybody from the media say that they would do anything differently, that they would not have pardoned if they were Joe Biden, essentially. And I think that that's a really good question to ask. We really don't know until we're in that situation. We would hope that, well, I'll speak for myself. I would hope that my ethics and my morals would be stronger than just my pragmatic, what benefits me in that moment, what benefits my family and my loved ones in that moment, that I would hold to the rule of law, that I would hold to, ethics and a high level of integrity. But the reality is he didn't. He chose this, whether he chose it in that moment or he had knew that he was going to do it months and months and months before is more irrelevant because we don't know that. He says in his statement that he made that decision, just that weekend. But the reality is he said, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. And then he changed his mind. And he changed his mind over something in particular that had a lot of ethical and moral weight to the country, to the role of the president of the United States, to the role of not being above the law. And then he made a different decision. And what's really been, like I said, what's been fascinating is watching people respond to what would they do. And almost everybody, I haven't seen anybody so far actually acknowledge, no, I actually love them enough to hold them to the consequences of their actions, and that they'll actually be stronger and they'll be better in their character and who they are by holding themselves to the line and saying, I receive the consequences of my bad behavior, of my intentional neglect of information, of my manipulation of the information, all of those things. But, a huge question around all of this is like, if any of the laptop and Russian stuff is true, then, Biden not pardoning Hunter would end up being a witch hunt of any kind, even if it was valid, even if it was legitimate, if there was really problems. I mean, the minute Joe Biden is out of office, people are going to be like, all right, bam, we're nailing Hunter, we're nailing Biden, we're going after this, we're going after any of the information that we've missed on this case. So there's a lot of strategical things within that may absolutely be a factor or may play into this decision more than just, I love my son and I care about my son. So we've got this ethical moral issue at hand that's very upfront and personal, that's very in the face of a lot of the media right now. Everybody's talking about it. What would you do? What did Biden do? Do we agree with it? Do we disagree with it? There's a ton of people that are saying, it's his son. This is how much he loved his son. And then there's people that are saying, I have a real problem with this. I have a real ethical and moral problem with this. He literally said he wasn't going to do it, and then he did it. And we held him as a high level of character, and now we look stupid because he changed his mind and basically is showing us his hand around moral flexibility. So there's kind of those two schools of thought and perspective on that. Now we have Pete Hegseth, and this one makes me sad. There's a lot of allegations out there right now that are not proved yet, but the reality is Pete Hegseth, who is being he's a nominee for Secretary of Defense, which is a very, very big deal, a very, very high role. He would basically be the one running the whole DOD. And was very, very excited about this nomination when it first came out because Pete is a Christian. He seemed like a really stand-up guy. I was really excited about, wow, like Trump is nominating somebody who actually has believes the same things as I do. And that absolutely impacts and influences his level of integrity, what he's shooting for on integrity, ethics, morals, all of those things that matter very much for the people that we have in office. And then all the allegations came out. And it was rather disheartening, I guess is what I would say, because there was a lot of what came out that was hearsay or anonymous allegations that you can't really, you're not proving in that moment, or unless they come out, it could just be fake. It doesn't, it maybe isn't even real. And what got messy and muddy and complicated in all of this is that the reality is Pete Hegseth had a lot of stuff going on in his past. Definitely a misuse of women, cheated on all of his wives. He's on his third, cheated on her. All of that has been proven. And then had this allegation come out that he had done some really bad stuff with a gal against her will. I'm saying it that way not because I don't want to get docked on this channel, docked on this video. You can go look at all of the allegations, everything. Actually, Megyn Kelly has a really good exclusive with him. Nobody else has interviewed him yet. She had a really great exclusive deep dive with him, and they go through all of the allegations. So if you want a deeper dive on the whole Pete Hegseth thing, go over to her. I have her link down in the description. Go take a look at her. But really, like, as we look at what's going on with him, the untrue stuff, the stuff that he's claiming that's untrue, and the stuff that is true and already confirmed, it's all kind of mixed in. It's all kind of muddy. And that's really discouraging, because then what you end up with is this argument that, well, hey, you should see me as I am now. You should believe who I am now and who I'm saying I am now, and the people around me and what they're saying about me now. And yet, here's the problem. The people around him that know him and have known him for years, I am not hearing any distinction apart from his mother. I'm not hearing any distinction between any of his Fox co-hosts, any of his military guys, any of the guys around him. They're not making any distinction between this was the Pete that I knew before and this is the Pete now. And wow, what a distinction. They're all saying, no, Pete's a really great stand-up guy. He's always been. So apart from his mother going on Fox, which we have it down below, nobody has actually acknowledged any real shift or change. And so all of the people that are backing him are backing all of him. They're backing Pete Hegseth, period. And the problem with that is even Pete is acknowledging, hey, there was the version of me before that I'm not proud of, but you should believe who I am right now, because I'm a really great guy. And I'm not, I'm not doing all that stuff. I won't drink while I'm in this role. I'm not, abusing women. I'm not any of that stuff. And that is concerning to me. Now, one of the things that Alyssa Farah Griffin said, which I cannot stand any of the people on The View, but she's the more conservative of the ones on The View, and some of the things that she says are helpful, or I think she has kind of a valid point. She's had experience in the DoD. One of the things that she said that I think is a very fair point for any journalist going after these stories and wanting to find the truth, or any law enforcement looking into him, any kind of vetting of the Senate, etc. One of the really important things that Alyssa Farah Griffin was saying on The View a couple days ago is that whenever you're being assessed for these kinds of roles, whenever you're interviewing for the DoD itself, they're asking questions like, do you have any kinds of addictions, in all of the ways, right? Because those addictions can be exploited by the enemy. Those addictions can be exploited by countries that we have a lot of conflict with, and they can be manipulated and exploited by anybody within the country or outside of the country that benefits from a weak government, a weak Department of Justice, etc., or a weak Department of Defense. Thank you. Sorry. And so the reality is, you're looking for people in these roles, especially in the military, the defense, any area where you need a high level of integrity. They're looking for people who are white, who don't have addictions, who don't have areas of exploitation and manipulation, where other people can say, oh, we already know this about him before he's even got in the door. Now we're going to pull at those threads all day long until we get something. And so the reality is, and by the way, this is true of any role. I think about pastors a lot, right? Pastors are susceptible to all sorts of abuse of their authority. And because they're, they have a high level of spiritual authority, they have the weight of preaching the gospel, of sharing truth, of shepherding a congregation. They are very, very susceptible to a lot of manipulation and exploitation from women, from people within the body, in the church, from people outside of the church, etc. Same in these kinds of situations where you are in a position of a high level of authority, a high level of pressure, and a high level of diplomatic weight. In other words, what you do and how you do it matters very much to the interactions that we have with other countries, and the quickness and effectiveness and integrity of how we make those decisions. The Department of Defense, the Secretary of Defense would have absolutely that level of weight and stress on that role. And so her mentioning that, I think, was very valid. That's something that needs to be assessed by the Senate. Those are questions, the information. I think that these like anonymous allegations need to come out so that we know what's true and what's false, and we can actually look at the information and say, this is totally made up and that there's no actual truth being tracked here. Or, hey, this is valid and this guy is not going to be a good guy in this position. But all of this, President Biden, Pete Hegseth, Bobby Kennedy Jr., all of these people who have, either made decisions like pardoning their son, Hunter, who has a very checkered past, and that past is not that far behind him. And then you have your Bobby Kennedy Jr., who has a very, very checkered past, and doesn't apologize for much of it, and has a very different, like ethical, moral standard that he's even like putting forward, let alone believing himself. And then you have the Pete Hegseths, who is like their past is just like they're obviously like Pete is obviously acknowledging, hey, I'm not proud of the guy I was before, but he's also really pushing this argument that you should just believe that he's different because he says so, and you should believe all of these people that have been through a variety of timelines in his past and their backing of him. And so this brings us to this question. What do we do when the moral standard seems to be shifting? When the moral standard of the people we put into office is shifting, is compromising, is changing? I am pretty sure I said in a live stream early on before Trump was president that if we put him into office without any kind of pushback from the Christian communities, from the pro-life communities, if we put him into office without any resistance or any push, then we are basically saying we're bought and paid for, and he doesn't need to even deliver on the ethical, moral, or like the ethical or moral issues of abortion, and he doesn't need to show up and actually be righteous. He just needs to give us what we want for wealth and good economy and, protection of the border. All of those things are valid. But if we're saying, hey, we're pro-life, we're Christians, we believe that abortion is murder, and now he is saying, I don't believe that anymore. I don't agree with that. That's not part of my platform. It's not a part of what I'm, really prioritizing. And they still come my way, that we would be peddling to this forever. We would be, watching his administration come in with checkered past, with mixed presence, with questions around, their ethics and their morals. And if those are pragmatic or ideological, in the sense that like, someone can say they believe something, kind of like President Biden. Someone can say, hey, I'm not going to interfere in the justice system. I'm not going to interfere in the cases with my son. And then he ended up doing it for all sorts of reasons. And whether you believe that those reasons are valid or not, it just shows that his moral code in context to this decision was pragmatic in the sense that it changed depending on the circumstances. And so we have to ask ourselves as Christians, as people who value a biblical worldview of things, is that something that we want to stand up for? Is that something that we want to dismiss or excuse? So a verse that really struck me as I was doing a lot of the research around the ethics, the morals, the stuff in question, kind of the theme of this show, was Matthew. Oh, I got to remember where I said Matthew 5. Yeah, Matthew 5, really the whole chapter, but I want to pull some pieces. Well, first, let's go to the 10 Commandments, because one of the sections of Matthew 5 that talks about, people dismissing even the smallest of the commandments it's not good. It's not good. So let's just go over the commandments, because if you haven't read them in a while, or you don't know them by heart, we need to review. This is regardless of the denominational specificity of somebody's religion or how they choose to live their life. Literally, the 10 Commandments is just like basic like integrity of humanity. So these are things that all of our all of our government officials, all of the people who have authority over and governance over our country and over the world, this is what we should be looking for. This is what we should be assessing. This is the lens we should be assessing through. Is, hey, are they being these things? And if they've been something different in their past, are they acknowledging that as the weight that it truly is? One of the things that I really listened for in Pete Hegseth's interview with Megyn Kelly is, was he sort of flippant of like, yeah, that was my past and I'm not proud of it. And, I needed to not be proud of it. Moving on to this, like, did it seem like there was a conviction about that there was like a genuine reconciliation around that? And I'll be really honest. I found that there wasn't. I didn't see it there. Now I realize that that's subjective. You may see something different. But I was hoping for a level of grief of his sin in his previous season of life, and a respect from the people that he hurt. I don't know. I didn't see it. But anyway, the 10 Commandments, Exodus 20, 1 through, we go all the way through 17. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger that is within your gates. For in the 6th day of the Lord made the heavens of the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Whew. That's a full list. And there's a lot in there that has been abused by these guys that are of question. And again, understanding that they're saying, hey, this is my past. This is where I came from. There's absolutely grace for that. I mean, man, if there wasn't grace for that, you guys, like, all of us would have nowhere to end up, because where we are now is a very different version of us that we were 10 years ago. And where we're going to be in 10 years is going to be a very different place than we are now. So there's absolutely grace for that. But that grace is not a dismissiveness of us as human beings. That grace is not something that we're giving ourselves. I've heard this so much. I've said this so much. Forgive myself, give grace to myself. The reality is, from a biblical context, God is the one that gives grace. And then he asks for us to give grace to each other. But to assume that we're giving grace to ourselves, that we're giving gratitude to ourselves, that we're giving forgiveness to ourselves, it can very easily create this culture of dismissiveness of the things in which we're doing that grieve the Lord. And when I look at what's going on with Pete and kind of his responses to some of this stuff, it doesn't settle my heart in like trusting that he's saying there is a huge distinction between who I am now and who I was then. Now, like I said, the only person that I have heard so far actually acknowledge the distinction between who he was and who he is now is his mother. And that distinction was not so much because she came out openly to say that, voluntarily to say that, but because she was pressured into it by a liberal news agency that was threatening to leak her comments, her email, without any context. And then after that, she chose to come out to Fox and explain and basically retract her email that she was communicating all the things that she felt about what Pete was going through with his second divorce and what was happening. And I'm not proud of you, and your character is awful, and you stink, all that stuff. So that wasn't even a voluntary choice. It was because it was leaked without the context of her having retracted a couple hours later, whatever. But the reality is, whether you chose to say those things in the way you chose to say them as a mother and you regret that, what she was communicating was something that she genuinely felt and saw. And then to come onto Fox, like, just even the nature that she came on, it felt very much like, rah, 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 I love my son, I'm proud of my son. Those are great things. But if the things that you're saying you're proud of are also getting mixed into the things that you once said you were not proud of, or you're dismissing them, or, well, that's not really relevant, or that doesn't really matter. Well, what are you saying about your own integrity and character? What are you saying about the character and integrity that you hold him to and that you want the rest of the world to hold him to? I felt really sad listening to her comments. I'm not dissing everything she said. I just felt like the tone of it was very much like, I'm coming out to like give kudos to my son because I want him to be in this really cool role and like go Trump. When I heard the comments from The View, which we all take the comments from The View with a giant, giant pail of salt. But when I listened to their comments about his mother, I couldn't disagree. And I wondered to myself, is this really holding the level of integrity and righteousness that we want to see in politics? That like the only people that most of the people that we're supposed to be the most excited about, that are getting picked and nominated for these roles, are people that we have to make all of these excuses for their past. We have to make all of these excuses and fight for a character that we're not even sure what's really intact, what's really there. Like, I was one of the first, like, I very quickly commented on Bobby Kennedy Jr. I am very excited about him and Nicole Shanahan having some involvement in health and food, and I'm very much appreciative for the stuff that they're sharing about. And at the same time, him in this position, him in this role, with the ethics and morals that he's shown to have, and the like, not even just allegations, or not even just that, because I haven't done a lot of research in that. So again, I'm not going to talk about it if I don't really know too much about it. But even just his perspective on things when it comes to like what I believe, especially around abortion, all of these things, it's like, we have to ask ourselves, man, like, are we making all of these excuses? Well, don't look at that. Don't look in that corner. Don't look in that corner. And then what we're really left with is very little. And what we're left with shows us what matters most to us. And I think that's kind of where the crescendo sort of happens in this conversation, is when we look at what we believe is true and how we believe we're supposed to live based on what we're saying is true, right? There's a certain kind of ethical and righteous code of conduct. And the 10 Commandments give us a really good framework for that. Most of those things, even today, are seen as culturally bad, but they're seen much less culturally bad nowadays than they were 10, 20, 50, 100 years ago. And even now, these are the things that don't dismiss you necessarily from being in a role of authority. They're things that, well, that's kind of inconvenient, or that's kind of like a spot in your record, but don't look at that. Let's do this. And then we have comments from, like Megyn Kelly and a couple other people that I was watching this week that are saying, yeah, but like, are we gonna dock every person points by their infidelity? Are we gonna dock every politician, the ability to be in these positions if they have these questionable things on their record, or they didn't, are we really gonna play that game because we won't have anybody left? And that's really the scarcity mentality, right? And that's what a lot of us Christians chose in how we voted. And I'm not taking back how I voted, but I do have to ask myself, I'm like, man, like, am I voting and then acting? Am I voting and is my action reflecting my moral code, or is it reflecting glorifying the Lord, or is my actions reflecting the compromises that I keep making? Is the actions that I'm taking reflecting the, just kind of participating and playing the political game? Once we started with compromise, we keep going down that road. And are we surprised? Well, if we are, then we're playing the wrong game, because compromise just leads to more compromise. And this is very much the case in what we're seeing come out against a lot of these individuals. Now, there are a lot of allegations about, a Pete Hegseth or even potentially a Hunter Biden that may not be true. That at least for Pete, there may be things that are basically there, the assessments that have already been done on some of the allegations around abuse, that are like legitimately, like, there's so little evidence there. There's so many inconsistencies. It seems so manipulated factually that unless they actually came out and there was more information that came out that was legitimate, it'd be like, that's not true. But that doesn't change. Just because someone's lying about you doesn't mean that the things that you did that are wrong somehow seem less significant or less relevant to the roles and responsibilities that you have to your country and to your God. And so I think that is sort of what we're seeing. We're seeing sort of like one wrong makes another wrong kind of smaller and insignificant. We want to point to this one, but we're like, don't look there. And the other thing that I keep hearing is like, well, look at who I am now, not who I was in the past. And yet, what sort of lens of what kind of perspective were we all pushing for when it came to a Kamala Harris, right? Like, don't look at what she's saying she is now. Look at her past. Her past shows you who she is. Her accumulative decisions and choices that she made, all of those things show you who they are. So we want to use that sort of principle when it comes to the people we don't want in office. But when it comes to the people that we do want in office, we're like, but don't look there. And so this really goes to show us, man, if this is the political landscape, and by the way, it doesn't have to be, is secular politics a game of compromise often? Absolutely. But it is that way because we've continued to allow it to be that way. And the reality is, if Christian politicians actually got in the game and were squeaky clean, then the only things that people would be able to throw at you were lies. So it's like, I would love to see people who have either, one, learned from the past mistakes they've made that are going to come out, because they all are, by the way, that have learned from them and are a drastically different person than they were then and who they are now. They're not trying to hide it. They're not trying to avoid it. They're coming with humility and integrity that can only be evident now and could not have possibly been evident in that moment because of the decisions or actions that they made, the mistakes they made. Or somebody who's saying, you got nothing on me. Like, you got nothing on me. Take a punch. Like, anything you throw at me is going to be absolute lies and totally proved in that way. And it feels to me like what we're seeing already from this administration is the opposite, which, am I surprised? No. This was what we were going to get. We were either going to get, like, we were all picking the lesser of the two evils, unless you were like a big, big Trumper and you were like, go Trump, which I know that there are those people who watch this video, so that's okay. But the reality is, like, when we're talking about this from the biblical context, it'd be a really hard thing to be a like, go Trumper, go MAGA, without acknowledging, wow, there are like some real discrepancies against the 10 Commandments, the very minimum, the basement, the floor of morality and righteousness. And some of this stuff is not even being acknowledged as wrong or bad. It's sort of just like, well, that's their lifestyle. And then we're all kind of making excuses for it. So these are a lot of things that we all get to analyze and assess, like, what are we celebrating and what are we not? One of the things that I had to look at is like, ooh, I kind of celebrated a Pete Hegseth early because I was like, oh my goodness, he's labeled as a Christian. He's a Christian. That's amazing. Awesome. Woo! And in some ways, I think for me, like, a lot of the reasoning behind celebrating early on that, is that it was like, "Oh my goodness, Trump's not as like, I just Trump, like, please do what you said you're gonna do, and, like, also, I would love for you to change on some positions. I'd love for you to not be backing that and that and that and et cetera," right? And so, it gives us like, when we look at stuff that's happening in our country and stuff that's happening in the politics, it should drive us to, 1, understand that human beings are sinful, and apart from the Lord, there is no transformation, there is no change. And 2, we should be looking to righteousness when we put forth a candidate. We should be looking to righteousness when we say, "Yes, this is my vote." Not what's kind of the, like, offerings. You know, if you go to a Chinese buffet, but you didn't want Chinese food, then you'll walk out. And do we know totally what that looks like when it comes to American politics? Kinda, maybe not. But there was a lot of there's been a lot of shaming for Christians voting or not voting in the way that they did. And there's been a lot of shaming on every side about how people voted and how people didn't vote and how they responded and their strategies, et cetera. And it just goes to show that when there's all of these question marks and innuendos and muddiness of the water, it gets really muddy for everyone. And the reality is that's the world we live in. It's the country we live in. But when we're saying, wait a minute, I mean, this should be an opportunity. This should be a moment of like self-reflection for us as well. It's like, wow, like, am I dismissing and disregarding these areas of my life where I wasn't righteous and I wasn't of high integrity, so that I can emphasize these other areas that I really like and enjoy? Am I being honest about my own life, let alone assessing other people? And so I want to leave you with that. Are you being honest about how you're living your life? And if it's of a high level of integrity and it's morally, a moral conviction, it's ideological, not pragmatic. It's because you believe it's true and therefore that's how you live. Because at the end of the day, if we're saying I believe this thing, but our actions are different, then it tells us that our belief is something else. Because what we believe is always how we respond. So whether we're saying, hey, this is what I believe, and then we're living a different way, it just goes to show there's a discrepancy. What I believe is something different because this is my behavior. And that's what we get to assess when we look at politics, is what they're saying matters to them different than how their actions have been. And then you got to look at, wait a minute, what's the discrepancy here? So that is the Friday live show. And I hope that this brought some reflection and some thought and some perspective to you that maybe you hadn't thought about before. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this live and you want to see more videos like this, I have such a variety. Y'all, we have been having so much fun on this channel, creating just a variety of content. So if you want to be where the fun is and also where the, biblical analysis of what's going on in the world and, what's happening on the inside of us and what's happening in the ways that we prioritize and what matters most to us and how to live a big, amazing life. Like, if you want to be in that space, then be here. And if you want to be here, subscribe. It's free to you. It's a no-brainer. Subscribe. Make sure you have all your notifications on. Join the community. Watch the videos. Interact. Comment. I want to say hi to you. Hello. Just be a part of this space because there's a lot of amazing things that have been coming in the last several weeks. And there's so many amazing things coming in the next several months. Y'all, the plans we have. So I hope that this was encouraging and this was clarifying for you. And I will see you on the next live show, as well as all of the other content that comes out on this channel every single week. Bye. I have to find the end stream button. Okay, goodbye.